Before we get started, there'll be spoilers for the 1000-Year Blood War arc of Bleach in the video to come. Well, you probably knew this was coming. It's the natural follow-up to the last video where we looked at the 1000-Year Blood War arc's biggest winners. This time it's the unfortunate dark reflection. Who are the worst of the worst? Much of the cast in Bleach's final arc gets at least some time to shine, which we highlighted last time. But inevitably, with a cast this big, some simply don't. There have to be some sacrifices, some casualties, and some characters were cursed by Kubo, cursed to fail spectacularly throughout the arc, whether they received virtually no panel time whatsoever relative to their perceived importance, to doing absolutely nothing of note over the course of 200 plus chapters. Or maybe they were just ruthlessly beaten up over and over again. Maybe they lost a lot of credibility in the 1000-Year Blood War arc. And so in today's video, I'm going to rank the 13 worst characters of the 1000-Year Blood War, those that I feel are the biggest losers of the immense battle between Shinigami and Quincy. Like I said earlier, I'll be judging this list on numerous criteria, much in the same way as the last video. What kind of development did these characters get? How many fights were they involved in, and were they of a high quality, or in this case, or not? How much panel time overall did they get, and perhaps most important of all, what kind of an impact did they have, if any at all, both on the narrative and the readership? What kind of a lasting legacy did their time in the 1000-Year Blood War arc leave, or was it more of a sour taste in the mouth? And yes, as this is the 2024 edition of this video, I'll be taking into account the current state of the anime as well. So without further ado, let's kick things off with a few dishonourable mentions. So to kickstart our dishonourable mentions, I've got the former vice captain of the 1st Division, Chojuro Sasakibe. Sasakibe is a really weird entry to start this list off, which is why I don't feel he deserves to be anything more than a dishonourable mention, but that doesn't mean he has a good time of it either. Realistically, nobody expected anything from Chojuro going into the 1000-Year Blood War arc. I mean, why would we? He's been totally overlooked by Kubo since his inception, so him going missing for the entire arc wouldn't have been a surprise. Instead, though, what is a surprise is the way Kubo chose to use him. Kubo thrust Chojuro into the limelight early on, but not in a good way. Chojuro is brutally killed by the Vandenreich during their initial assault, becoming the first named Shinigami character to die during the present-day storyline. Nothing says you are not really a character of value than being chosen to be killed off first. So it's a dubious honour at best. If this was the absolute last we had ever seen of his character, then yeah, he probably would have a numbered entry on this list. But his death is offset somewhat by some nice, unexpected posthumous development, as well as a surprise bankai reveal of all things. So, while by no means a winner, Chojuro's situation isn't quite so clear-cut as it might first seem. Our next dishonourable mention might look a little familiar to those of you who watched the Biggest Winners video as well, as it's the captain of the 10th Division, Toshiro Hitsugaya, back for round 2. The only crossover entry, much of what I said in that video still applies here. Hitsugaya does have a lot to do in this arc, and he crops up all over the place, meaning he has a decent amount of impact as well. But there's no overlooking the fact that Kubo brutalized the poor guy at almost every step of the way. Hitsugaya loses his bankai in the first invasion, and then, despite making a point of recognizing his weakness and trying to learn from it through training, Kubo puts him through the ringer against Bazby in one of the arc's most violent beatdowns, turning Hitsugaya into an example that the captains simply don't stand a chance against the sternritter without bankai, no matter what they might think. He then spends much of the second invasion as a zombified slave, forced to turn against his allies while acting as Giselle's twisted puppet. Eventually, he is restored and gets to show off his completed bankai, which is great, but even that turns out to be totally ineffective in the end. It's for these reasons that I think Hitsugaya straddles the line between winner and loser, appearing on both lists as a result. And finally, rounding out our dishonourable mentions, we have none other than Uryu's father, the self-titled Last Quincy Ryuken Ishida. Now, does Ryuken have a cool part to play in the story? Absolutely yes. The fact that he forges the still silver arrow that eventually helps to kill Yhwach at the same time avenging his wife Katagiri is extremely badass and the ultimate in revenge storylines. However, considering his prominence in the narrative as one of the only two Quincy to exist prior to the 1000-Year Blood War arc, and therefore his proximity to Uryu as his father, Ryuken should have had so much more to do here. It was always very strange that one of the rare Quincy to exist in Bleach basically wasn't involved in the arc about the Quincy race whatsoever, and Ryuken's appearance at the end, as cool as it was, felt tacked on. So Ryuken makes this list as a dishonourable mention simply because he doesn't do enough when you consider his standing, his overall stature within the narrative. The same kind of goes for Uryu too, but Ryuken's complete and total absence feels more egregious. However, the anime has already gone some way to help fix Uryu's role in the arc, and so there's still time for them to do the same for Ryuken as well. Okay, but moving now onto the actual list. First up, we have a character that I'm quite conflicted about, and that's the former captain of the 7th Division, Sajin Komamura. From the outside looking in, it's pretty easy to see why one might consider Komamura a loser of the arc. He gives absolutely everything he has in a passionate defense of Yamamoto, wanting to avenge the head captain's death by utilizing the mystical secret technique of his clan to become an immortal human in order to kill Yhwach. But he doesn't even come close. Kubo doesn't allow him that. Instead, Komamura expends his life in a fruitless battle against Bambietta, defeating the Sternritter, yes, but at a cost ultimately far too great. Komamura, overcome with selfish revenge, is reduced to a wolf forever, unable to even talk or wield his Zanpakuto. It's a brutal, harsh, and frankly unfair end to the character. Yes, thematically it's cool, but it's a punishment that doesn't fit the crime. This is a terrible war the Shinigami are fighting. To single out Komamura for judgment like this is cold, no matter how fitting or cyclical it may be in reference to Tosen's earlier downfall. But that's why, for me, Komamura comes in so low on the list. Despite him being written out of the arc halfway through and suffering a fate far worse than he realistically deserved, in my opinion, he still gets the most interesting subplot of all of the captains who had their bankai stolen, by far. There's so much heart to this story, no pun intended, and Komamura's character is definitely elevated by his awesome new form. It's just such a shame he suffers in such a seemingly irreversible way for little to no reason. Bambietta even returns later on, admittedly a shell of her former self, but still. In the end, then, it feels like Komamura's big sacrifice was for virtually nothing at all. Up next, we have Sternritter I the Iron Kangdu, who feels like a prime example of a Sternritter that simply didn't live up to his potential. Now, not every villain needs extensive amounts of screen time or a huge battle or anything like that, especially in an arc littered with so many enemies. But to me, Kangdu feels like the poster child for some of the mistakes Kubo made with these Quincy villains, especially early on, such as unceremoniously and abruptly killing off the Sternritter we as readers thought we were supposed to be getting attached to. As one of the Sternritter who stole the captain's bankai, Kangdu was afforded some level of prominence early on in the arc, but by the time the second invasion rolled around, not only did Bazby essentially steal Kang's entire battle against Hitsugaya, but Kangdu himself was then almost instantly defeated by the captain, who turned the tables thanks to the convenient timing of Kisuke's intervention. Don't get me wrong, overall it's a cool, cathartic sequence of redemption for the captains, but Kangdu undeniably gets screwed over big time in the process, barely getting a few pages worth of a showdown with Hitsugaya before being immediately taken out. To make matters worse, he's then brutally executed by Hashwolf despite being completely free of injury. And in seemingly another blow to the character, the anime went another step further and stripped away all of Kang's last words. Not only that, but he and BG9 are the only two sternritter in the arc to activate their holy forms and yet never actually get the chance to show them off, in what feels like yet another slap in the characters' faces. In fact, I did consider putting BG9 on this list too, for what it's worth. The fact his shrift isn't revealed really sucks, but at least he got an actual fight against Soifon. So I guess it's a balancing act where neither of these characters really win in the end. The reason Kangdu only comes in at 12th on the list is because as a new face in the arc, there wasn't much expectation surrounding him in the first place. Just missing out on the top 10 is the former Captain Commander of the Gotei 13 and Captain of the 1st Division, Shigakuni Genryusai Yamamoto, whose leadership totally falls apart in the early stages of the arc. Now, don't get me wrong, I actually like Yamamoto's character arc in the 1000-Year Blood War. It's an absolutely savage dismantling of the character, a lesson in what happens when the past is allowed to catch up to you. So I do think Yamamoto is one of the arc's biggest losers, but it's by design. I think he's doing his job in the arc well. Yamamoto has been depicted as nigh untouchable throughout Bleach so far, and so to get this surprisingly emotional, fragile version of the character as his world begins to just crumble around him was shocking to behold. After Chojiro's death acts as the catalyst for Yamamoto's unravelling, we see his composure is shot. He's no longer himself, struggling to think rationally, instead fixated upon destroying his resurgent enemy, one that he failed to defeat properly 1,000 years ago. A while back now, I dedicated an entire video to how Yamamoto's grip on control began to spiral in this arc in an unprecedented way. Mayuri not only defies Yamamoto, but openly calls him out to his face, and Yamamoto is forced to watch as the Gotei 13 burns in the fires of a war he himself unknowingly stoked. The final insult comes on his deathbed. Yamamoto is cut down after seemingly giving in, a look of sad, quiet acceptance on his face as the real Yhwach appears before him. But even then, after all is seemingly lost, Yhwach places his boot on the Captain Commander's head as he lies face down in the dirt, the Quincy King elaborating on why and how Yamamoto has failed so dramatically. Like I said, I really enjoyed Yamamoto's character arc for the short time he was around in the 1000-Year Blood War, but it always felt foreboding. Like from the moment of Chojiro's death, Yamamoto's own days were numbered. The inevitable was coming for him, and his immense sadness and grief combined with his cold-blooded murder signalled the end of the 1st Division as we knew them forever. Okay, but moving into the top 10 now, and we are starting things off with a pretty weird one. In 10th place, we have the Vice Captain of the 10th Division, Rangiku Matsumoto. Now, it's pretty clear to me that Kubo elects certain Vice Captain to have a lot of spotlight per arc, and Matsumoto's time in the sun has been and gone by this point in the story. It was during the Rankar arc, where she played a pretty huge role emerging at the forefront as one of the series' most prominent supporting characters. She's part of Hitsugaya's advance team and so battles 2 different sets of Rankar, as well as getting close with Ichigo and his group of friends, before being heavily involved in the fake Karakura Town battle as well. And so it's really weird then to see her have such a diminished role here in the 1000-Year Blood War arc, to the point where she's essentially reduced to a bit player and in some ways feels almost unrecognizable. Now again, her time is over, but she really was promoted to a major player in the series' biggest arc. So there's considerable whiplash when she's then yanked backwards again in such an obvious fashion. You see, Rangiku goes from being all over the series to doing virtually nothing. She teams up briefly with Hitsugaya against Bazby before going missing, only to then be killed off-screen by Kangdu, who dumps her body onto the ground. From here, she's zombified by Giselle and used to do her bidding. Eventually, Mayuri then saves her life, but despite travelling to the royal palace with her captain, Matsumoto isn't seen again until the epilogue. It's a strange, almost cold-hearted dismissal of one of the series' most lively characters during the Arrancar arc. There's almost nothing left of Matsumoto's previously bubbly personality, and while the circumstances admittedly don't really call for it a lot of the time, it's a shame to see her effectively reduced to what feels like a shadow of her former self during the small amount of panel time she even gets. Now, as for this next entry, I wasn't sure where to place her. I only knew she almost certainly deserved to be here. And that's the third Espada, now the Queen of Hueco Mundo, Tia Haribel. Haribel is a weird one. If you hadn't read the small supplementary story Nestle Tonight, you probably didn't even expect her to show up in this arc, having assumed she was killed by Aizen during the fake Karakura Town battle. But no, she's very much alive and currently ruling Hueco Mundo, but unfortunately for Haribel, the Espada is made an example of by the Vandenreich. When Yhwach and his Quincy invade off-screen in the source material, Haribel is savagely beaten and taken prisoner, chained up in a dungeon within the Quincy Palace of Silburn somewhere. It's an old cliché in storytelling to establish the threatening power of your new villain by having them dominate a previously strong bad guy like it's nothing, and that's exactly what happens here. Sadly for Haribel though, despite the fact that rescuing her could have turned into a cool little subplot for the remaining Arrancar characters, instead this is the only time we see her in the entire arc. Yhwach throws back the curtain to reveal her bloodied state, the Espada now a prisoner of war, and she's essentially never mentioned again. It's especially funny when you consider Ichigo and his friends mount a rescue of none other than Donda Chaka, travelling into enemy territory to try and get him back, but no one even thinks twice about Haribel languishing inside her cell. Now, Can't For Your Own World reveals that yes, the Arrancar do in fact go and break her out, but as far as the actual final arc of the source material goes, Haribel is a big-time loser, and is completely forgotten about, left to rot in the darkness for the rest of the story. Again, I'm really hoping the anime takes the time, even just a small bit of time, to show her being freed. In 8th place, we have another member of the Sternritter, and this time it's Sternritter N. Robert Akutrone. Much like Kangdu previously, Robert was one of the few Sternritter to actually be built up during the first invasion, getting a lot of face time with the audience and naturally placing some expectation upon his shoulders. Except with Robert, I think it's actually a little worse. For whatever reason, Kubo really decided to highlight Robert during the first Quincy invasion, giving him effectively a full back-and-forth battle with none other than Kyoraku Shunsui, even going so far as to have Robert blitz Kyoraku, catching the captain off guard and shooting out his eye. Yes, Robert Akutrone is the reason Kyoraku wears an eye patch, and it's no secret that people thought he was going to be an awesome new villain, popping people left and right with his pistols, all while speaking for the Sternritter themselves in regards to how they, as a unit, come together to fight in Yhwach's name. So yeah, he was a big deal during that first fight, and yet he's completely and utterly tossed aside by the time the second invasion rolls around. Not only does Robert have absolutely nothing to do in the second fight, but he's reduced to fodder status, barely saying anything as he occasionally fires his gun at someone. His shrift is never revealed, and he's so forgotten about by Kubo that his actual name was only revealed mere pages before his untimely death at the hands of Yhwach's Alsvalen, the narrative's own way of classifying Robert as a worthless, expendable sternritter. You can kind of see it now, Kubo deciding to have Robert die like this and then suddenly realising, oh crap, I've never actually revealed this guy's name, we need to put this in this chapter right now. The only reason Robert isn't higher on this list is because the anime took the time to show his off-screen battle against Byakuya and actually made him look a little better than expected, being the only sternritter of the three that Byakuya felt the need to use bankai against. But even then, the anime looks set to have fully off-screened Robert's death this time round, and declined to even reveal his name at all, so again it's a balancing act, unfortunately. Next on our lengthy list of losers comes a captain that really doesn't get talked about much in the 1000-Year Blood War arc discourse, and for good reason. The captain of the 2nd Division, Soifon, who feels like she just drops off the face of the earth in this arc. Soifon goes through many of the same trials and tribulations as her fellow junior captains. Her bankai is stolen during the first invasion, and then she is decimated by the sternritter when she tries to fight without it. Soifon, though, is beaten in record time by BG9, something that I think goes totally overlooked. Without her bankai, she gets maybe 2 hits in on the sternritter before he completely overpowers her in the space of about a chapter, nullifying everything she tries to do before rendering her unconscious and near death. The real problem with Soifon in this arc, though, is, well, everything after this moment. While Soifon does get to defeat BG9 when her bankai is restored, this is the absolute end of her relevance. Unlike the other 3 captains who had their bankai stolen, this is where her story comes to a screeching halt, and unlike Komamura, she doesn't get anything cool either. She doesn't get any additional development, she doesn't get a unique and interesting subplot, she doesn't even get another fight. Soifon shows up here and there as the Shinigami prepare to enter Varvelt for the final battle, and yet, despite being shown in the Royal Palace, the captain totally disappears, never to be seen again until the epilogue. What's even weirder is that Omaida himself is glimpsed briefly after Gerard transforms, leading me to one conclusion. Soifon was somehow sniped by Leal and left behind, while even her vice-captain was able to escape. It's admittedly more likely that Kubo just completely forgot about her, but either way, it's a bad outcome. Soifon is probably the most lackluster of the original captains in this arc in that she just gets nothing to do. Her spotlight moment, if you can even call it that, occurs over maybe half a chapter before she's instantly bested. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Soifon should have gone to Yoruichi's aid in the battle against Askin over Yushiro. Maybe the anime will make that change, though I'm not holding my breath. Well, you knew he was going to be on here somewhere. In 6th place, we have the current captain of the 5th Division and former de facto leader of the Vizards, Shinji Hirako. Everyone give a round of applause to this channel's favourite running joke of a character. I suspect you thought he might be a little higher than this overall though, didn't you? Well, as you'll soon see, I'm cheating a little in that regard, but we'll get to that later. In all seriousness, I like Shinji, as I've always said, so his treatment is definitely a shame. Despite being a powerful, hollow-fied, fan-favourite captain, Kubo's continued desecration of Shinji's character and the tarnishing of his reputation is baffling. Shinji's performance in the 1000-Year Blood War arc is dire, to say the least, beginning with him being immediately blown aside by Bambietta after explaining how his Shikai works yet again. The 2nd time in the series that's got him into trouble. The thing is, there isn't even a meta reason for him to explain it anymore. We, the readers, know what it does now. Following this, Shinji is set upon by Basby and saves the day using his Sakanade to escape Burner Finger 3. But I hope you weren't expecting to see Shinji's crowning moment of the arc. Oh no, That happens entirely off-screen, hand-waved away in a rushed explanation by Omaida of all people, before being removed from the anime entirely. Though I have a sneaking suspicion we may still see it in part 3. Shinji then travels to the royal palace before being pretty much immediately flattened by Gerard before he can even draw his Zanpakuto, taking him out of the final battle straight away. It's moments like this when I just don't understand Kubo. What did Shinji do to deserve this? Why didn't Kubo want him in the final showdown at all? Hell, he didn't even have to fight Gerard. Maybe the Gotei's dwindling forces are completely surrounded by a massive army of soldat, so Shinji lures them away to use his bankai on them. But no, Gerard literally swats him like a fly, and yet somehow Hinamori survives virtually unscathed, despite being in the same place at the same time. Now, I know we've already discussed that Hinamori is one of the most powerful characters in Bleach, but now she's charged with carrying around her liability of a captain instead. The only reason Shinji avoids being in the top 5 on this list is because the anime is doing some major damage control already, giving him a much better showing against Bambietta, and to top it all off, revealing his previously light novel exclusive bankai, which is a pretty big deal in my eyes. But you're on thin ice, Shinji. The anime better continue to improve your standing in the future. Alright, we've made it to the top 5. These 5 are the worst treated characters in the 1000-Year Blood War arc, at least in my opinion anyway. Now, there were a lot of ancillary characters that could have made the list, to be honest, but didn't for one reason or another. There are a bunch of sternritter, for example, who are just treated absolutely horribly, the likes of Nyanzol and Nanana, for example, and there are several side characters who also didn't really get their dues. Ginjo, Grimjo, Neliel, and the like, though I don't think any of them are really treated too badly per se, even if their presence or lack thereof was underwhelming to see. These 5, though, I think are the worst of the worst, but as always, let me know your lists down in the comments. First up, we have the former captain of the 13th Division, Jushiro Ukitake. Ukitake is a weird one. I feel similarly about him to how I feel about the likes of Komamura, only I feel Ukitake's overall bungling is more severe. Ukitake just has so much potential as a character, but Kubo seemed totally reticent to use him at all in the final arc, which was really strange. Unlike characters like Komamura, who have had plenty of time to shine previously in the story of Bleach, Ukitake really hasn't. This was his moment. And despite being narratively in a similar place to one of our biggest winners, Kyoraku, for much of the story, Kubo clearly favours one over the other, with Ukitake being completely left to the wayside for the vast majority of the arc. If you were hoping to see Ukitake in some long overdue action, think again. He doesn't crop up in the arc until long after the majority of the fighting is done. Instead, his role is a very unique one. He has sacrificed himself, offered himself up to Mimihagi, the right arm of the Soul King, in order to prevent the collapse of the worlds after Reio's seemingly inevitable death at the hands of Yhwach. Honestly, it's a really cool setup for the character, and I might have enjoyed it a lot more had Ukitake actually done something else in the arc prior to this. And that's where my conflict comes from. I like Kubo being bold with his characters and taking them to the extremes of their storylines. I like him pushing we, the readers, outside of our comfort zones, but it's annoying when it ultimately amounts to nothing at all. When the entirety of Ukitake's arc in the 1000-Year Blood War ends with him kind of failing miserably and then dying, it can't help but feel like a waste. Ukitake's contingency plan lasts for maybe a couple of chapters at best, as his body is consumed by the power of the Soul King and he acts as an anchor for the worlds, desperately trying to buy everyone some time. And I guess, to some extent, he kind of succeeds, but Yhwach destroys Ukitake's hold on Reio, viciously killing the captain at the same time. in an overall underwhelming demise for one of the series' original captain characters. And yet what really compounds this feeling of wasted potential is that, on top of Ukitake's arc being over and done with almost the instant it begins, it really feels like he could have been so much more. Where was he all this time to advise Kyoraku now that his closest friend has become the captain commander? That could have been a really good use of Ukitake's character. The two of them have one fleeting conversation in this arc, and it certainly doesn't feel like Kyoraku realises that he's talking to him for the very last time. And then, despite Ukitake's connection to the Soul King, his flashback, if you can even call it that, is minuscule, amounting to a single panel. It just feels like after all this time that Kubo ultimately wanted to be done with Ukitake's segment of the story as quickly as possible, and that's a real shame. Now, considering how cool I think Ukitake's role is, despite it not amounting to much, if the anime is able to improve upon it greatly, flesh it out, add some more to Ukitake's character in general, perhaps his position at 5th on this list can be reconsidered. But for now, of the 4 elder captains of the Gotei 13, I mean, there is no denying that Ukitake gets the short end of the stick by far, and feels like a tacked-on afterthought that Kubo just had to deal with. And that really sucks. In 4th place, we have perhaps a bit of an unexpected choice, but really a totally fitting and justified one. And that's Chad. Perhaps Chad feels like a surprising choice because the general readership of Bleach is well aware that the sun set on Chad's development a long time ago. Kubo seemingly made the conscious choice to leave Chad behind, I think personally starting around the time of Yami's Zero Espada reveal, and it's been that way ever since. And yet, there's the sense that Kubo couldn't make up his mind about Chad for a while. Ichigo's best friend plays a huge role in the Lost Agent arc, seemingly making up for every second he spent lying face down in the sand in the Rankar arc, until all of a sudden he didn't, replaced at the final hurdle by a frankly much less deserving Uryu. You all agree, surely, that it should have been Chad fighting Ginjo alongside Ichigo, but it just didn't happen. Of all of Ichigo's spiritually aware friends, Chad has fallen the farthest, to the point where it used to be a meme, and now it's not even really funny anymore. The series acknowledges on multiple occasions that he isn't able to keep up with Ichigo, and that's okay. He vows to not hold him back regardless. But it seems Chad's way of not holding Ichigo back is to simply not get involved at all. Despite this being a war that encompasses all people and all worlds, it is not an understatement to say that Chad does absolutely nothing at all. He gets shot by Kirige several times and, well, I mean, that's about it. And despite that, Chad hangs on. He trains with Orihime in Wako Mundo, he travels with Ichigo to the Royal Palace, but doesn't do anything, ever. The most Kubo ever has Chad do is prepare himself for a fight. That's it. Whatever development Chad received is completely just thrown out of the window. Chad trains extensively in the Lost Agent arc. Doesn't matter, he'll never do anything again. Honestly, the sad truth is that Chad is only still here to pay lip service to the fact that he was once a part of the main crew. Uryu plays a fairly big role here in the final arc, and even Orihime gets some nice development towards the end, going so far as to help Ichigo in battle against a Soul King Yhwach. Where's Chad during all of this? On statue cleanup duty. Yes, Kubo invents some inanimate enemies for Chad and Ganju to battle, or more accurately, keep them out of the picture. I mean, surely there was a better way. I keep entertaining the idea of a huge team-up. Imagine if Ichigo, Chad, Orihime, Renji and Rukia, maybe not Uryu as he's facing Hashwolf, came to try and stop Yhwach together, without him using the Almighty, of course. At the very least, there could have been a few chapters of them all working together before he inevitably destroyed them. The thing is, Ichigo and Orihime get destroyed anyway, so why not let Chad in on the action too? It's possible the anime will rectify Chad's future, but I highly doubt it. Chad is on this list not because he's treated awfully or anything, but because he doesn't receive any treatment at all. The 1000-Year Blood War arc is the lowest of the low for Chad's character because he's just there at this point. Like a ghost or a bad smell, he's hanging around, doing literally nothing, and it's a sad sight to see. Kubo has given up on him. And now we reach the top 3, the truly terrible. Honestly, I really wasn't sure who to put at the very top, and while I'm happy with my list, again, I'd love to see yours as well. But we're starting off our top 3 with the last sternritter to make the list, and that's Sternritter E, the Explode, Bambietta Basterbine. Bambietta's tragic arc plays out somewhat similarly to Kang and Robert's before her, at least to begin with anyway. As one of the sternritter that steals a captain's bankai, Bambietta enjoyed a great introduction in the arc. Along with the likes of Asnot, she defined the early days of the Vandenreich in the eyes of the reader, becoming one of the most popular sternritter quickly, and helping to define the identity of our newest villains. But no one could have predicted what Kubo had in store for Bambietta's arc to come. After being swiftly demolished by Komamura early into the second invasion, way before many thought that she would be beaten, though that's again a sentiment shared regarding all of the sternritter who stole a bankai, Bambietta is brutally murdered off-screen by her supposed friend, Sternritter Z the Zombie, Giselle Jewel. At this point, the old Bambietta that much of the audience fell in love with is totally gone. When she resurfaces, Bambietta has been zombified by Giselle and is now being paraded around as her puppet slave. With no free will of her own anymore, Bambietta answers only to Giselle, desperate for her blood at all times to keep her shattered, reanimated form going. In this sick state of suspension, Giselle torments Bambietta constantly, belittling her and beating her, abusing her for the slightest thing in what's clearly supposed to be a reflection of Soul Society Mayuri and Nemu's relationship. While Giselle takes a perverted sexual pleasure from Bambietta's agony, the sternritter is forced to fight for her friend, with Giselle using Bambietta as something that's less than human. Bambietta's body is carved up, blown up, and desecrated throughout the course of her battle, with Giselle even forcibly using her as a meat shield to defend herself at one point. And if you thought there was a happy ending of sorts in the stars for Bambietta, well, you'd be wrong. When Bambietta dares to protest at Giselle trying to drain her of the blood that she once gave her, Giselle responds by ruthlessly bashing Bambietta's head in against a rock, bludgeoning her until she seemingly dies once again, lying there with an eye swiveled upwards and her skull caved in. As for the source material, I mean, that's the end of Bambietta, an undignified second death at the hands of her tormentor. Bambietta was by no means a good person, quite the opposite in fact, but this always felt like a sadistic stripping back of her entire character until there was nothing left. In second place, we have another vice-captain to pity. The vice-captain of the 9th Division, Shuhei Hisagi. Hisagi has fallen a long way since his glory days of the fake Karakura Town arc. Once Bleach's golden boy, showered with a plethora of awesome moments and great fights during his meteoric ascent to popularity stardom, Kubo seems to have decided to bring Hisagi crashing back to Earth in the most savage way possible. The 1000-Year Blood War arc is just a series of brutal losses for Hisagi, one after the other after the other. I'd argue no single character has a worse string of luck than Hisagi, who is beaten and bloodied in virtually every single way imaginable. During the first Quincy invasion, Hisagi is completely pummeled by Sternritter O, the overkill Driscoll Bursey, who almost kills him with a gigantic Quincy spear. Alright, fair enough. Almost every Shinigami is having a hard time of it during this invasion, so this is to be expected. He's not necessarily faring any worse than the rest of them. And after this, there seems to even be a glimmer of hope for the character. He's going to learn bankai. But of course he has to be beaten up first, and so Mashiro gut punches him to the point of nearly killing him. Whatever, it's a training arc, everyone's going through hardships right now in order to get stronger. But then the second invasion happened. Kubo used every single opportunity he had with Hisagi to dunk on the poor guy for some unknown reason. Hisagi finds Ikkaku and Yumichika amidst the chaos, only to be destroyed by Sternritter S, the superstar masked demasculine who jumps them out of nowhere. Hisagi is the only one of the three who is able to keep fighting, but that just results in more beatings, as Mask ruthlessly clotheslines him before Hisagi is knocked out cold as his head smacks against the rubble. Kensei, ever the compassionate captain, merely scoffs at Hisagi's inability to show the fruits of his training, hinting that he did indeed learn bankai. Oh boy, I sure hope we get to see it. But with Kensei basically verbalizing how Kubo feels about Hisagi at this point, you can be sure he's still in for a world of hurt. Later, Hisagi returns, only to be instantly controlled by Sternritter L the Love, Pepe Wakabrada, who turns him against Byakuya. Although Byakuya takes him down yet again, the Love forces an incapacitated Hisagi back to his feet, and the fight continues. In perhaps Hisagi's lowest point in the arc, a mind-controlled Hisagi lunges for his zombified captain, only to be quickly and brutally knocked out once again, this time having his head driven into the ground by Kensei. And finally, just when things couldn't get any worse for him, after he spends a fair bit of time being healed and recuperating, Hisagi heads to the royal palace with everyone else. But he's quickly made an example of, being the one Shinigami we actually see sniped by Leal, an enormous hole punched diagonally through his entire body. As Hisagi crumples to the ground in near death, probably contemplating at this point the life choices that led him to this moment, we don't see him again until the epilogue, where Kubo's new designs for this character are laid bare for all to see. As he's mocked by everyone for failing to reveal his bankai at the series' end, it's clear that Hisagi has been reduced to nothing more than a comic relief punching bag, a very far cry from the man that once emotionally killed his former captain. But there can be only one winner, or in this case, loser. And in fact, like I alluded to earlier, I am cheating a bit here, because I haven't just got one character sitting atop the pile, but quite a few. Because taking the top spot in today's video is, collectively, the Vizards. Now yes, Shinji has already appeared on this list, but I feel like he deserves his own position. He's a much bigger character than the rest of them for starters, even if it doesn't feel like it. But also, secondly, if I separated every Vizard, frankly they would make up half of this list. The rest of the Vizards can all be lumped together, as they're all equally terrible in the 1000-Year Blood War arc. The Vizards are split into two groups in this arc, those that rejoined the Gotei 13 and those that didn't, but they're all treated badly no matter what. Although they're both captains again, Rose and Kensei are embarrassingly destroyed by Mask Demasculine despite both of them using their bankai. Rose explaining what his bankai does, allowing Mask to defeat him with ease, is a sin the character has never lived down, while Kensei is simply overpowered and outmatched. If you thought them rejoining the Gotei 13 would improve their chances, think again. Kubo uses the Vizard captains as scapegoats to hype up other, more important and popular characters on a consistent basis. At this point in the story, Renji is basically able to walk all over these characters in what feels like a real disservice to them. But Rose and Kensei are then both killed by Gremmy before, you know the drill, being zombified by Giselle. But their fight isn't even seen. They arrive at the last second to challenge Mayuri, and so instead face off with his Arrancar corpse unit before becoming his minions instead, the control over their lives changing hands rather rapidly. Rose and Kensei, of course, don't make it to the Royal Palace for the final showdown. Despite Hitsugaya and Matsumoto also being treated for the exact same zombification at the exact same time, Rose and Kensei don't get to regroup with the others above. Their entire contribution to the war effort is to be slaughtered by a Quincy in a luchador costume before being tossed aside. But to be honest, that's not even the worst of it. Mashiro Kuna, remember her? She apparently returned to the Gotei 13 as well, taking up the position of super vice captain, and helps Hisagi train to learn bankai as mentioned in the last entry. But that is literally all she does. Kubo forgets about Mashiro from this point onwards, there's no two ways about it, and she's never seen in the source material ever again. And then there are the Vizard left in the human world, Hiyori, Lisa, Love, and Hachi. At the very least, these guys get some semblance of a subplot where they're recruited by Kisuke and Mayuri to patch up the distortions cropping up all over the world, although much of this is totally gutted in the anime, an obvious comment on the Vizard's perceived importance. There's even a nice bit of development later on where Hiyori is forced to join up with the Gotei she so detests, as everyone comes together for the final confrontation. But I really hope you didn't go in expecting too much. The four of them come together for one single attack against Sternritter M, the miracle Gerard Valkyrie, before he knocks every single one of them out with one swipe of his hand. It is completely absurd, for lack of a better word. Bear in mind, as mentioned earlier, Hinamori just survived being flattened by this very same enemy. If you thought Rose and Kensei's contributions to the war effort were lacking, then try this on for size. Hiyori, Love, Lisa, and Hachi at the same time unleash one single attack each in the span of 200 plus chapters and are instantly defeated, never to be seen again. Well, okay, Hiyori pops up in the final chapter, but that's literally it. I mean, this is another scenario where I just don't know what Kubo was thinking. In what world is that a satisfying outcome for essentially an entire faction of your story? Surely as an author he has a desire to explore these characters even a little bit more, but I mean, clearly not. The Vizards have fallen oh so very far, to the point where I'm not sure their reputation can ever be fully redeemed. From being original members of the Gotei 13 over 100 years ago to a complete joke, the Vizards are the worst characters in the 1000-Year Blood War arc. I know lumping them all together is a bit of a cop-out, but like I said a minute ago, if I didn't, half the list would be made up of just these guys. There is expectation here, especially with those that rejoined the Gotei 13, and yet they fail to deliver in every sense of the word. But that's it for the video, guys. There you have it, my list of the top 13 biggest losers of the 1000-Year Blood War arc, a follow-up to my biggest winners video. Make sure to go check that one out as well if you haven't seen it yet. What do you think about my list? Do you agree with it or do we differ? Who would you have on your list that I didn't put on mine? As always, make sure to leave your comments down below. I'd love to see your own personal lists and to see maybe where I missed some obvious names. But that's it for the video. As always, guys, I really hope you enjoyed it. As always, I want to end by saying a massive thank you and giving a huge shout out to my supporters over on Patreon. I really do appreciate each and every one of you so very much. If you like what I do here on YouTube and you want to support me on Patreon too, you can do just that to get your name in the credits like this and to get every video I release absolutely ad-free. Alright guys, but make sure to hit subscribe if you're new here. Until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.